Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse. This is Season 2, Episode 23. Today is Sunday, May 31st, 2015. My name is Graham Perro. With me, as always, are Melissa Daphne and Tyler Fitch. We've got a couple, actually just one bit of news to talk about. Obviously, it's a fairly big one. And just one game to talk about, which is also a fairly big one. So should be an interesting show. Let's get started with the Minnesota Swarm, which are now known as the Georgia Swarm. That's going to take some getting used to. So the Swarm have announced that they were moving. I guess they did this last week, and we talked about it. This week they announced where they're going, and they're going to the greater Atlanta area in Georgia. They will be called the Georgia Swarm, as I said, and will play at a place called the Gwinnett Center, which is about a half hour northeast of Atlanta, in the town of Duluth. This is the team will still be owned by I was going to say there are a lot of brothers. I believe it's actually a father and son. So they're still going to be owning it. I think the son has actually moved to the Atlanta area, so he's going to be living there. I don't know about the dad. And I can never remember whether it's John or John or Andy that's the father. One of them's the father, one of them's the son. Anyway, this is a bit of an interesting move. Almost as interesting as the move itself is the timing of the announcement. The move itself, we can discuss in a minute. The timing of it, I think, has universally been looked at as really bad. Obviously, there are other things going on in the NLL right now, that being the finals. Right in the middle of the playoffs just seems like the dumbest possible time to announce this kind of thing. Just stealing the thunder away from what should be the focus. The focus is the championship. That's what everybody plays for. That's what the whole point of the whole league, the whole point of the regular season, the whole point of all of it is to win the championship. And when that's the only focus in the league, announcing something like this just makes no sense at all to me. As for the location, no history there. We've had a team in Florida. We've had a team in Charlotte. That was a total and complete failure in just about every sense of the word. There's been other teams in the South, Arizona, San Jose, and Anaheim, I guess, were the five that I wrote an article about all of this earlier this week. And the Arizona team did pretty well attendance-wise. Orlando did pretty well attendance-wise, but none of them lasted all that long. The San Jose Stealth lasted for 6 years. That was pretty good, but they didn't get the crowds. As for how Atlanta's going to do, there's really no way to know. They did have an MLL game, a championship game, held in Atlanta. I don't know if that was at this. Well, it wouldn't have been at this arena because it's an outdoor league. But that was in Atlanta last year or a couple of years ago or something, and they got about 8,000 people there. But as we've seen many times before, field lacrosse popularity in an area doesn't necessarily translate to box lacrosse popularity there. So, yeah, I guess we really won't know until they start playing. I'm personally a little kind of pessimistic, but maybe that's just because we've seen so many teams come and go in this league that, whenever they announce anything, we figure, okay, well, chances are it's going to fail unless something weird happens and it succeeds, because that's what we're used to. Melissa, your thoughts?
This kind of surprised me. I agree with you about the timing of the announcement, and maybe part of that is the fact that we're heading into June and the season is still going on. So this news that normally would be starting to trickle out right now, we wouldn't think anything of, and now because the season's so much longer, they're not holding on to the news like maybe they should. Georgia seems strange to me. I know we talked about maybe Nashville because the Predators are there, but it doesn't strike me that Georgia's a big hotbed. But I don't live in the South, so I really don't know what it's like down there. I don't know if there's a demand. I know in some of the smaller, like the farm teams and stuff, they do well in places like that where there isn't a whole lot to compete with. So maybe this might actually be a really good fit. I agree. We're just gonna have to wait and see. Although I do like the way Georgia Swarm sounds. It kind of fits. So it's nice to see they're going to keep the name and probably the team. What about you, Tyler?
The The arena I like. The size of 11,500 seems about right. They're not trying to fill a huge place. I didn't dig in too closely, but I suspect there'll be a top tier tenant at the arena, so they'll be able to get good dates because it's not competing with like an NHL team or anything else. So I'm liking that part of the announcement. The timing wise, it's definitely not great when the league's trying to focus on championship to announce, hey, by the way, somebody's moving. But there are some good things happening. I suspect that the Georgia High School Lacrosse Championships are happening right now, or maybe this weekend. I know in Washington they were this weekend, and Oregon hasn't had theirs yet. So if they announce now, they can have a presence at those high school championships to help marketing immediately. Like already let people know the team's coming and get it in the minds before they stop playing lacrosse for the summer or for the year, and then they got to try to get their attention later. I think that's one key aspect of announcing already, if that's what the timing allows for down there. The MLL, Graham, you mentioned was championship game last year. It's also this year. The 2015 MLL championship is in Atlanta, Georgia on May 8th. So usually we don't see too much cross promotion between the leagues like directly, but I strongly suspect that the Georgia Swarm will at least have a pop-up booth or some sort of tent at the event to help drive interest in the league. So the ML doesn't have a team there, but they're having some major events in the area, and I know a couple college teams are playing out of there already at Division I, maybe on the women's side more than the men's. But definitely a growing hotbed. It's not overly conducive to getting Canadian players there, maybe like Minnesota, but Atlanta is a huge hub or the hub for Delta Airlines, so there should be tons of flights to get there easily, no matter where they're coming from for players. So that's probably factors in the choice. But I think they announce it sooner than later gets them going with their marketing now, and that was a key thing. It's definitely probably been in the works for a while, because I think the announcement was 2 weeks ago that they applied to move, and here they already have a lease signed. Remember when the Stealth did this in 2009, leaving San Jose, they announced it, and it was like a month or 6 weeks before they announced where they're going, because they actually went out and started shopping arenas, and this happened quite quickly, so I suspect this has been in the works to some extent. I don't know. I'm super happy that they're not folding, and I'm optimistic about the location because of the arena they picked. It seems like it should be viable. That's my thoughts. Back to you, Graham.
One question, Tyler. You mentioned that the MLL Championship is May the 9th. That was 3 weeks ago.
August 8th.
Okay, that makes more sense.
If I said May, I was totally unable to read a moment ago.
Okay, so actually, thanks for mentioning that, Tyler. The bit about the high school lacrosse championships. I had no idea about that because we don't do high school lacrosse in Canada, at least not in my area. So if they decide they want to do some marketing and some advertising and raise awareness, sort of thing, to thousands of high school lacrosse players, and that's certainly a good time to do that. So that's that may have been part of it as well. Yeah, so maybe the timing decision was sort of unfortunate, but it makes sense from a marketing point of view, rather than let's just steal the thunder from the Rock and the Rush, which wouldn't have made any sense at all. So I'm glad there's at least a possible explanation for why they announced it now.
I think they already had their championship too. Sorry to interrupt. It looks like 2 weeks ago they had their championship, so that theory doesn't really hold up. But they got done early. I guess they finished school early over there. We have late schools on the West Coast. Late school years. Go ahead, Melissa.
It's okay. I was just gonna say I'm surprised that it was only a week, like you were saying. So it may be just, even if there's nothing to tie it into, they may simply just want to be starting to pound the pavement and get marketing going. Really just head into it. I mean, we have the the World Indoor Lacrosse Games in New York in the fall, so maybe they're going to tie something into that too, even though there may not be much local. It's still, they got a team they can kind of tie into that. So.
And one other thing that I discovered while doing some research here was that Atlanta has been voted the worst North American city for pro sports several times. I think it's not just last year. Now, I saw one or two of these sort of lists that they were near the top of, and I think Seattle was right up there too. They were more objective, looking at number of years since the last championship in each of the four major sports, and they sort of added up the number of years. And so Chicago gets like 150, mainly because of the Cubs, but not so much because of the White Sox and the Blackhawks and that sort of thing. So when they take all those numbers and add them up, Atlanta's really big, Seattle's really big, but I think at least some of these lists that I looked at were looking at them a little more subjectively, in that if the team's doing well, they get all kinds of people out there. If the team's not doing well, the attendance drops like a rock. And that's true in some places. That's not as true in others. I mean, obviously, Toronto Maple Leafs haven't won a championship in 45, 47 something years, and they still sell out the ACC most nights. There was a time there where they sold out the ACC or the Maple Leaf Gardens, whichever it was, for 35 straight years or something ridiculous like that. Yeah, so who knows what's going to happen there, but maybe the fact that there isn't a lot of other choice there will work out for the Swarm. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens down there next season. Speaking of the Swarm, another quick piece of news that we want to talk about. It's not so much news, but the 2015 draft will be coming up, I guess, in September, October, somewhere in that area. And as usual, the Swarm have a zillion picks in the top 10, the top 9, I guess. And Isle Indoor published an article a week or two ago about the draft order. And so here is the list of who's going to draft when. So I just wanted to go over that just for interest's sake. So the first overall pick will be, now all of these things say Minnesota, so I'm going to say Minnesota a few times, but I mean Georgia. So the first overall pick will go to the Swarm. The second one will go to Rochester from Vancouver, presumably in the Johnny Powis trade. Number 3 will be Minnesota again. Number 4 will be Calgary. 5 will be Minnesota. 6 will be Minnesota, so that's 4 of the top 6 picks going to the Swarm. 7 is Calgary again. 8 will be the Edmonton Rush, and 9 will be the New England Black Wolves. That coming from Toronto in Brody Merrill deal, possibly. I'm not entirely sure how that happened. I don't think it was Garrett Billings. I'm pretty sure that was just a 1-to-1 swap, so this might have been for Brody Merrill. So Toronto gets no picks, Buffalo gets no picks, Colorado gets no picks, Minnesota gets almost half of them, which is pretty much par for the course over the last 3 or 4 years. Toronto has had 1 first-round pick in the last 4 years. Minnesota has had 12. Toronto's in the finals. Minnesota didn't make the playoffs. So I guess you can interpret that any way you like. But Wes Berg and Lyle Thompson seem to be the top 2 picks available. This is apparently a really, really strong draft. And I've heard a ton about both of those 2 players over the last couple of weeks as the NCAA championships were going on. Now it looks, I guess Isle Indoor is saying that Minnesota might look to take Thompson as opposed to Berg, who Berg is kind of assumed to be the number 1 seed anyway, if there is sort of such a thing as seeding in these kind of things. Only because Lyle will then be able to play with his brother Miles, and that's obviously a good thing for them. Rochester will end up with Wes Berg, and it was kind of like with Jeremy Noble adding that kind of firepower to an already strong offense. Now that one didn't work out because of Noble's work commitments. If Westberg doesn't have that kind of issue, then we could see a really good offensive team in Rochester next year.
But Berg's also a BC kid and Denver alum, so Noble's from Ontario, and he still wouldn't go because he was living in Denver. Berg's got 2 strikes against him. I don't know if they necessarily go there. They maybe go for a defender or a transition player if they're from the East. It shouldn't matter. They should pick the best player, but if the guy's not going to show up, I hope they learned their lesson last year.
Which means Minnesota at number 3 could end up with Thompson and Berg. That would be quite interesting.
Which, I don't know. Then the same argument holds up. If he's not going to go to Rochester, why would he go to Georgia? It's very, very interesting. But there's actually a top pick with the name Graham, so you're finally going to be in the league.
I noticed that. One of the top defenders, where did it was on here? A guy named Graham Hossack. He even spells his name correctly. So good job for him. And I'm looking forward to the first Graham in the NLL. Sorry, Melissa, it looks like you're last of the 3 of us.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to happen.
Unlike Tyler, and there's just Tylers all over the place, particularly if you're not a Swarm fan, a Stealth fan.
Yeah. And
okay.
Another great draft pick will be the Jesse King kid from Victoria. Lefty forwards are pretty rare, so he'll probably have a lot of value to somebody. Maybe Calgary at 4 if Minnesota doesn't try to scoop him up before that.
Yeah, I've seen his name coming up a lot recently as well.
He had a good NC2A tournament. They had a couple big upsets. He's a great player, and he helps Vic a lot. They Victoria Shamrocks and WLA cruised through the playoffs. Then King returned to college both years, or at least the first year they played the Six Nations in Victoria, and their team just not flatlined, but their offensive production dropped a significant amount. He's very important to them, and I think could be important to any team.
All right, let's get on to the game of the week, not games this time. Obviously, only the one game this week. We are into the finals, last 3 games of the year, possibly even the last 2 games of the year. As a Rock fan, I'm kind of hoping for 3, but we'll get to that in later. So Edmonton obviously took out the Rock in Game 1, 15-9. I was at this game in Toronto, and when we made our picks last week, I picked the Rock to win this game based on how they played the previous week against Rochester. They just had every aspect of their game working. They looked like they were really focused. They just came out of the gate on fire in both Game 2 and in the tiebreaker. And if that was the team that we had seen on Saturday night, then that would have been a much different game. But it wasn't. Brandon Miller was okay, but not great. Nick Rose came in and played a little better. And then in the third, Miller came back out again. And I don't know if that was Miller saying to John Lovell, look, put me back out there. I want to get this done. Or maybe it was the other way around. Lovell saying, no, you're our guy. We saw what you can do last week, and we have confidence that you can do it. But it didn't seem to work, and Rosie came back out in the end of the third or early in the fourth. I can't remember which. But yeah, the goaltending was okay, but certainly not what it was last week. Defense wasn't bad. Transition was okay, except the rush defense was just so fast that it didn't matter. Every time there was any kind of transition break for the Rock heading up the floor, by the time they got there, there was already 2 defenders there. So the transition chance didn't turn into much of a chance. And so it was either a 5-second possession where they just end up shooting the ball at Aaron Bold, who was outstanding, or they'd pull it up and wait for the whole offense to get out there, and the chance kind of evaporated. The rush defense was just as good as we have been seeing for the last 2 years. They basically wouldn't let the Rock get in close all that often, and Bold was stopping all the shots from out farther away, if they made it to the net at all, because there were block shots all over the place. So the Rock really just didn't have anywhere else to go. Yeah, I thought the Rock offense was generally pretty good. They were doing the passing thing like they like to do. Um, they just tended to have to pass an awful lot because none of them could get a good shot on net. Um, so Edmonton played really well. Toronto played yeah. So I mean that's going to result in an Edmonton win every time. Um, the Edmonton offense was very good. Mark Matthews, just holy moly. Um, if if the playoffs counted in the MVP voting, I would have had to at least bump him up pretty close to Sean Evans. I voted for Sean Evans. Um, but Matthews was just amazing on Saturday night. Not because he scored 17 goals, but he was just everywhere, making amazing passes, um, firing just bullets. I can't believe how fast this guy can shoot. It's amazing. And one of my friends was watching him saying, "Doesn't he shoot an awful lot like John Grant?" And I'm guessing he was talking John Grant 10 years ago as opposed to John Grant now, which is still not bad. But yeah, so full credit to Mark Matthews for playing an excellent game. I'm assuming you guys watched this game, Melissa. What did you think?
Go ahead, Tyler. I'll let you go first this week.
Okay. Yeah. Fun game to watch. I picked it right, so that felt good. I think the insiders were about 50-50 split between who could pull this game off. You covered a lot about why Edmonton won. They were fast, they were aggressive, they weren't just whittling away and trying to get great shots anytime their hands were free. They were ripping shots and beating Miller, and got into him early. Brock Sorensen had the first goal. I think the first two goals maybe, but then it was 5-2 at the end of the first, I think. And just anytime they went on a fast break, if their hands were free, they shot. Anytime they got into a set offense, if their hands were free, they shot. It wasn't. Nah, I don't know about that. It was fun to watch. Just kind of run and gun style, and they showed no fear of anything that the Rock were going to throw at them. And they had a few fans in the crowd, so like as they got on their roll, you could actually hear the cheering on the broadcast. There weren't a lot of fans from Toronto there, is what I noticed. It was a lot of empty seats. It's hard to sell games on a week's notice, and it wasn't necessarily the championship game. So it's not like they were just going to essentially maybe even just give away seats to the point of filling the arena for the championship game, so it looked good. They might be back in 2 more weeks. They hope they're back in 2 weeks at this point. I remember the Stealth Championship game in 1 week's notice. They sold out the arena that had not really been sold out at all season. And so here on 1 week notice, looked like there was less than the average attendance for Toronto, and I think that factors in the fact that it wasn't the game, but people might have missed their last chance to see the team play in Toronto this year. It's kind of a little screwy in that sense, but that's how a lot of other sports do it. But they have longer playoffs. You have a 7-game series. You go watch the first 2, and your team leaves, and maybe they win on the road or on a sweep, and that's that. But I think you got to go turn out and watch the games you can, but they didn't appear to have that. One thing that was definitely killed the Rock was Brett Hickey's performance, and I'd have to rewatch it now that I've seen how the game played out, and because I wasn't focusing on it. Was Brett Hickey being shut off by the Rush defense, or was Brett Hickey having an off night? He didn't seem to even have the ball in his stick a whole ton anyways. We have a lot of forwards on that, a lot of shooters at all positions. But Hellier had a lot of shots, but I didn't see even a lot of shots or possessions from Hickey. And I think as he goes, the team goes throughout the season. The guy scores 50 goals in the regular season and got one essentially in garbage time last night. That's not good for the offense. now looking forward slightly, I'm looking at Edmonton, and I think they're motivated to win the ring and win the championship. Probably super motivated for their fans, because a lot of the guys have actually been on team for a few years, so that they've got camaraderie with their fans actually. But I don't know how if they care the fact that they're playing at home anymore, because they've been told that it's not necessarily going to be their home. So I don't think they're probably caring where they play. They just want to go out and play and win. I think they'll. I don't want to give away my pick too much, but I like their chances. It's definitely a great first game of the series so far. What do you think, Melissa?
I agree with you guys. This one was a fun one to watch. You really didn't know how it was going to go. Edmonton definitely went on a big streak, which I think helped them. But at times it almost felt like a big brother with a little brother, which is funny when you think Edmonton's a younger team. But they're almost like, okay, yeah, we'll let you back in this game. Come on. Oh, no, we're just joking. And they put another 4 goals up. And, oh, no, come on. We'll let you back in. No, just kidding. So it was almost in reach, and then they just put it back out. And almost in reach. And it wasn't like they were slacking. Like we have seen some teams. It just seemed like they were showing they could score at will, which had to have been frustrating to the Rock. Both sides had a lot of shots go off the crossbar, some to their favor, a lot not. So the pipes definitely played a big role in addition to the goalies. I was surprised with Brandon Miller and Rose. When they first swapped them out, Rose was doing better and Toronto was doing better, and it seemed like they got back in. So to see Miller back out in the third was quite the surprise. And I don't remember if they had the interview with the coach or if one of the announcers had said that they talked to the coach, and the coach said that, well, Miller is who got us here, so we're sticking with Miller. That's great, but if your goalie's having an off night and it's just not clicking with your defense, then you might want to change that. And if Rose would have stayed in, it might have been different, because they put him back in and it was just like too little too late. Some really good plays. One of them I was really happy to see, because one of my big frustrations watching the Mammoth is there isn't always an awareness of where the ball is and where their feet are and things like that. And there was a play that was in the second quarter. It was the Rush's 8th goal, and Toronto, I don't remember which Toronto player it was, he kind of fumbled the ball and the Rush recovered. And the first guy, Ryan Dilks, had shot. And he had enough momentum that normally you would have seen that player just go right through the crease because it was blocked and there's the end of the play. But he actually circled around the crease, and Thompson was right there, got the rebound and scored. And it was just great awareness by both players, because Ryan was able to scoot around the crease, keep from getting crease violation, and then you had Thompson, who saw that the shot was blocked, he could get the rebound, and he scored. And that was just a great play. It was a solid play, and you did see that from Edmonton a lot. I wish I could see that with the Mammoth this season. It was very frustrating, because there were so many plays, and it was with other teams too. There was a play that if the guy just wouldn't have been so focused on running to the bench, or in some cases walking to the bench, and just looked and saw where the ball was, it's like, wow, you could have maybe scored on that. So it was really good just to see that awareness. Toronto definitely looked a little flat in certain parts of the game. They reminded me of the Mammoth offense. So it wasn't completely surprising when the Rush were shutting them down, because they weren't cutting, or they were just passing the ball. But it was a good game. I'm excited for next week. I think it's tough between these two teams, because they both are really strong, and they'll have moments where they just play so solid, and then the next week you're like, wait a sec, is this the same team? So I was surprised how chippy this game was. There was a lot of cheap shots going on from both teams. I'm kind of surprised there wasn't a bigger injury or anything, because there was some really just floor leveling hits. I mean, I don't remember who it was went after Miller, and he ducked, and the Rush player basically slammed into the boards. So it was definitely a hard hitting, they weren't holding their punches type of game. And the refs were definitely keeping a tight control, making sure there weren't any fights. So I think next week's going to be really exciting. We'll see if Toronto can tie it up and send this out another week, or Edmonton might, in their 10th year, actually get their first ring. So I'm definitely excited for it. It was a good game. It's the kind of game you want to see in the championship. So.
One thing that actually you mentioned, Melissa, that the game was quite chippy, and it was a really odd turn of events in the fourth quarter near the end of the game. Jeremy Thompson must have hit somebody. I don't remember actually seeing the play, but he hit somebody and got a 5-minute elbowing major for it. And then both Colin Doyle and Josh Sanderson, obviously, 18-year, 17-year vets of the NLL, both lost their minds at the same time and both took penalties. And since the Rock already had somebody in the box at that point, I'm pretty sure Patrick Merrill was still in the box then, yes. So they ended up with 3 people in the box, can't do that, so Edmonton got a penalty shot. Now they missed it, but by that point the game was over anyway. It didn't really matter. But it was unusual that both Doyle and Sanderson, who have both been captains of this team, Sanderson's captain this year and Doyle's been for the last 5 or 6 before that, that they would both get so angry at whatever it was that Thompson did that they both take penalties. It seems like, Sanderson for sure is not known for being a hothead, for losing his cool and that sort of thing. Doyle has in the past, not so much in the last few years, but I certainly remember Doyle in the early days. He looked like the kind of guy who was really wanted to get out there and fight, but the coaches wouldn't let him because he's too good a player. And that's calmed down over the years, but he was really angry at whatever it was, as was Josh, to the point where they both took penalties, and that was rather surprising.
Yeah, I ran it back for that, and it looked like he elbowed Casey Behrens, who's been a long-time teammate of Sanderson and Doyle, and I don't know why they chose that moment with less than 2 minutes left to finally get fired up, but I don't know, maybe it'll carry over to the next game, but it seemed out of proportion. Like, yes, the guy elbowed your teammate, but the refs saw it, the refs called a penalty, and if it had been a close game, probably wouldn't have done the same thing, but since it didn't matter, they just went after him. But I don't think those two would lose their heads in a 1-goal game and give up a penalty shot. But it was, I don't know, maybe it's setting up something for next week, but it was too little too late when your team's been getting manhandled all day or out-hustled all day.
And I was worried that it was going to turn into worse than that and start some sort of bench clearing thing or 3 fights all break out at the same time or that sort of thing. It's unusual to see that in the playoffs. I would imagine it's even less likely that you'd see that in the championship game or series. But it kind of looked like one of those Buffalo Bandits kind of things where, well, we're losing with a minute left. Let's just fight everybody. And that way we can win something. We're not going to win the game, but we'll win something. And that's not the way the Rock generally go. So I'm glad it didn't get to that. But like I said, it was surprising to see both Doyle and Sanderson taking essentially retaliation penalties. And that was even the second one for Sanderson because he had gotten hit earlier in the game and turned around and slashed the guy that hit him. And Sanderson got the penalty and the other guy didn't. So maybe they were both just frustrated that they couldn't get their game together. That they as a team, the whole team just wasn't playing nearly as well as they had the previous week. They got frustrated. Like you said, Tyler, it would have been nice if they had done that a little earlier and taken out their frustrations on Aaron Bold by scoring on him rather than trying to beat people up. But if they can take that anger and redirect it next weekend, then we could see a much different game. And Melissa, I wanted to comment on the thing that you saw as well with Dilks and Jeremy Thompson. We saw the same thing. Dilks ran up shot the ball, went right what looked like went right through the crease, because that's what a lot of players would have done. And then Thompson grabbed the rebound and scored on a wide open net. And so we were like, okay, show the replay, get that flag ready to throw. And we saw the replay, and Dilks just made a professional, excellent move and just shot the ball and went right around the crease. And there was no question he wasn't anywhere near the crease when the goal went in. So we're like, okay, never mind. So that was a very nice play by both Dilks and Thompson.
Thompson was looking at it like, is this really happening? I'm just standing here with Rose on the ground. Okay, I'll score.
Yeah, there was definitely a few goals that it was like, wow, they're just making that look easy. Is there a goalie in the net? Oh.
Yeah. Okay, one extra thing to talk about. Were the player awards all announced? No, they were not. And I actually tweeted about this today, and I never got a response from anybody. So I don't know what the league is doing for their awards. Isle Indoor has announced all of their awards, but that's just the website.
The league announced goalie, I think.
Did they?
Well,
I didn't know that, because I wasn't sure if they were going to do the same thing as they did last year, where they would save it until September and have the big gala celebration thing, but I haven't heard either way.
Yeah, I think it was like Buried Friday.
That seems unusual. Okay, well, we'll check on that and see if any announcement has been made.
All right. It turned out it was the IL Indoor one that I was thinking. I just know that there was a thing on the Mama site that Cupido won Transition Player of the Year, so it was like, oh, well, I didn't even look and see there was IL Indoor. So that's where that award came from.
Yeah, Cupido was Transition Player, Rubish was Defensive Player again, Matt Vince won Goalie, Sean Evans won both Offensive Player and MVP, Terry Sanderson won GM, and John Lovell won Coach of the Year. I believe those are the ones that we announced. And the other question was, what's it like to watch a championship game in your own arena? And I am obviously lucky enough to have done that a number of times. Melissa and I were talking about this just before the show, and I was actually surprised at how many I've seen. I saw the 2001 championship game in Toronto, which the Philadelphia Wings won. Then I saw 2002 was in Albany, and I watched it on TV. 2003 was in Rochester, and I was there for that game. And then 2005 was back in Toronto against Arizona when the Rock won that. So that was the first championship I'd seen the Rock win at home. And then 2011 they won it again at home against the Stealth. And obviously the game on Saturday was not a win, but it was also not the championship final, so we didn't actually see a celebration there. So I guess I've seen 5 championship games, 6 championship games, 4 of which have been in Toronto. I'm bad with math. I only have a math degree. Melissa, I guess your team has won the championship, but not in Colorado.
No, that was in Buffalo. We've hardly even had any home playoff games, so it's been kind of crazy. And the one year we went to the Cup, I was on a flight to China, so I had to wait until I came back to even watch the game. But technically, I got a win for my birthday, so that was kind of cool, because I was in a different time zone. So.
Well, that's not bad. And the Stealth did win the championship in Vancouver.
Everett.
Was it in Vancouver that year? I think it was.
No, they were in Seattle or Everett at that point.
Oh, it was Everett. That's right. It was.
Yeah. Yeah, so I watched that game in person and it was phenomenal. That was I think the only official sellout that the Stealth ever put together. And I don't know, the crowd made a huge difference in that game. Rock came out ready to go and took an early lead, like all the way I think through the half, but the Stealth came out in the third quarter, got on a roll, and the crowd really backed them up, cheered them on, and I think helped give them the motivation they needed to turn the game around. it was a huge difference that really helped. The following year, it was in Toronto, and I flew out for that game, and the Rock had an early lead, and the Stealth mounted a comeback, but came up short. And I don't think it was entirely about the lack of fan support. It was, overall, they just started poorly. But it would have been different if they were at home that year. So having a championship game at home can make a huge difference if it's going to be a close game. We saw Rochester go on the road when they're supposed to be at home, and because they were the best team, they still were able to win it pretty handily against Arizona, I think, or not handily necessarily, but they won it, and they powered through there. But in a close game, it can make a huge difference to have your hometown crowd behind you, and it's fun to be part of.
It's interesting that last week, I guess Toronto had 2 weeks to pump up that game because they had the bye week before, saying we're going to play this game in 2 weeks, so everybody get your tickets. We don't know who we're playing for the first week, but it's going to be Buffalo or Rochester, so either way it's going to be a fun game, and it's the playoffs, and so they had 2 weeks to pump it, and they got 10,500, somewhere in there, to that game. This past week, it's the finals, and so you'd figure you'd get at least that many people, but they got less. It was about 9,500, so it was about 1,000 people short of the previous week. But it was a noticeable difference. Like the previous week, we were looking around at the crowd and thinking, well, it's a pretty decent crowd. We were there during the 18,000, 19,000 years, so we have seen the place completely packed, but not for many years. So we look around and see 10,000 people there, and we think that's not bad. This past week, I didn't think it was even as high as 9,500, and it was noticeably quieter. It was very loud during the Rochester games, not nearly as loud this past week, and I don't know if that was because the Rock weren't playing well or the other way around, that the Rock weren't playing well, in part anyway, because the crowd wasn't so loud. I'm sure having a loud crowd is big for the players. So, like you said, Tyler, it can make a pretty big difference.
Can also fire up your opponents though too. So it's just like with the Mammoth, they used to dominate because of the crowd, and now every other team comes in here so fired up to shut the crowd down. So, or when the Mammoth played in Buffalo and the crowd kind of turned on the Bandits when they weren't doing anything and started cheering for teams that weren't even playing in the arena. So.
Okay, let's get to our predictions, and I guess Tyler's been looking forward to this part because he was 1-0 last week. Melissa and I, not so much. Obviously, we got that one wrong, 0-1. So I am 5-2 overall. Melissa's 4-3, and Tyler is now 3-4. And we have a similar pick coming up this weekend. Obviously, the same teams, different location. Tyler, you got that one right, so you can go first this week.
Sure. I really love what I saw from Edmonton. I know Toronto went to Edmonton early this year, and I think beat them in OT, or the game went to OT, so it was close. But the way things are going right now for the Rush, they are totally gelled and clicking on all cylinders, every cliche you want to throw out there. And I don't think they have any reason to fear the Rock, especially coming back just a week later. It's not like they have a long time that things will happen between here and there. They saw the guys. They know the Rock will try to make adjustments, but the Rush just need to go out and do it again. That's a pretty good spot to be in when you're going for a title, knowing that just do what we did and not scrambling to change something. So because of that, I'm picking Edmonton to go ahead and clean this up and win it at home, and could be all sorts of amazing that they'll win their final Edmonton Rush game and then cut out of town. That would just be nuts, but I think there's a chance we'll see that. Who are you going to take for this game, Melissa?
It's tough, and I've definitely been thinking about it all weekend. And I think we're going to go 3 games. So I think Toronto isn't going to play the way they did. Edmonton might get a little cocky. I don't know. I think next week we're just going to see a much closer game. So I am going to go Toronto again. But I will say I am cheering the Rush. So, but I think they're going to take it in Game 3. So I'm putting that out there now. All right. What about you, Graham? You
Okay,
gonna be a
well, I
homer?
gotta go with the Rock here. Um, I've been trying to figure whether or not this is a homer pick, and I think it's about a 60-40 thing. That 60% of me thinks it's got to be the Rock because I'm a Rock fan, and let's go Rock and all that sort of thing, and so I'm gonna vote for them. And the other 40 is, well, if they play the way they played on Saturday night, this one's over and Edmonton wins it too. If they played the way they played the week before against Rochester, that'll be a really good game. And if that's the case, I think Toronto has just as good a shot of winning it as Edmonton does. And I think now I wanted to say the Rock are playing for Terry Sanderson, and they would really like to get the championship. In basically, I heard this recently at an interview with Jamie Jowak. This is the last team that he put together, and as a tribute to him, they would really like to win the championship with that team. But the Rush are also playing for Aaron Bold and his girlfriend, as well as Wendy Keenan. So both teams have very powerful motivation that way. Yeah, so I'm going to go with Toronto, and like I said, it's mostly a homer pick, but I think they can actually do it if they play, like I said, the way they played against Rochester, and if they come out there as fired up as they did a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, then we should see a really good game. So it looks like we got 2 of us going for Toronto, 1 going for Edmonton, and yeah, so if Edmonton wins it, we will have 1 more episode next weekend to discuss that. And then I guess we'll be on hiatus for the summer. And if Toronto wins it, then we'll have 1 episode next week and then another one the week after. And depending on what kind of news we have in the NLL, we may even record a few shows over the summer. Who knows? If there are more team movement or big trades or other crazy things happening. Until then, check out addictedtolacrosse.com. That's where all of our old shows are archived. And you can find us on Twitter at Lax Podcast. You can find us on Facebook, also at Lax Podcast. Feedback at addictedtolacrosse.com will also work for email. Send us your comments, send us your questions. Tell us what you think of the show. Yeah, so this has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For Tyler and Melissa, I'm Graham. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week.